All right. So Percia, back in the day, my early podcast days, I used to do these long, extravagant, very drawn out intros. And not to say that you don't deserve an introduction like that, because we're all special people and we all, you know, have our qualities.
Thank you.
But I think, you know, I changed the mode a little bit for the podcast because I want things to be as natural as a conversation as they can be. Before we get into today's episode, I want to remind you, if you like the episode, give it a like. And if you really like it, subscribe. Let's dive in, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, I'll go back through the beginning. I'll do the intro myself, solo doloing, just talking about, who you are and why I had you on the show. Um, but I kind of just want things to start out like in a very like natural way. And we were talking a little bit before I started recording how you work in the podcasting world, which isn't like the main crux of this entire episode, but it kind of is a little bit. We'll talk about it probably a little bit. But I'm actually really curious to hear about like that side of things for you because as someone who we were just talking about deals with microphones and audio and quality and sound systems all the time,
Yeah.
like how is it working in the podcasting world? What does it mean? Are you like an audio technician? Like what is your like talk to me about a little bit about what you're doing right now in that world.
Sure. It's funny. So I'm a producer,
Mm,
or I'm a producer by trade. So in
mhm.
audio, unlike most like film or TV industries, because audio has such low budgets, when you work in audio, you often can do more than one job.
Got you.
So there are people who are just recordists or just audio technicians, but
Mm,
most people who work in podcasting specifically can write, they can edit, they know editing software, they can record, they can produce. Producing is kind of a catch-all term, but it involves like setting up interviews, pre-interviewing, doing research, working with hosts,
right.
guiding recordings, all that kind of stuff. So I started I started as an intern.
Mm.
My first job out of college was an internship at Radiolab, which operates out of WNYC here in New York. And I called it a job. They did not pay us. And we were actually the last, they got it together, but we were the last group of interns that they did not pay. Me
Wow.
and my like co-intern, we were literally the last people to not be paid. I think they gave us like some sort of subway subsidy or something. Um, and yeah, so I was a nanny at the time. That was my real job.
Uh,
Um, but yeah, now oh sorry. So I started at Radiolab, and then my first salary job was actually at Marvel, and that was my first producer job.
what?
Yeah. So they were starting their new media. Um, they were starting their
What?
new media like wing, their new media group, and part of that was podcasts. And so I was like an associate producer, and then I was a producer, and then my job now is actually more in the production coordination area.
Mm.
So I was I don't know if you could tell. I felt like you felt my ghost haunting over you while you were like preparing for this recording because I was like, oh, are you going to send me this? Like, when are we going to schedule it? I was sending you timelines, I was sending you dates. I don't know if you could fe feel my producer
Okay.
energy.
Okay. So you know how guest guys usually say that they're nervous to be on the show? I think I just got a little bit nervous for myself being the host of this show. I didn't This is quietly and secretly becoming like the it's gonna become like the best episode because I'm with a professional here. Like I'm not with someone who's rinky dink. Like this is a true professional
Well,
of
I'm
their craft.
I'm not a professional on the mic, but I'm a
I mean,
professional behind the scenes.
I mean, what you worked with Marvel? That's so cool. I love Marvel. I mean,
Yeah.
I like Marvel.
Oh, okay. Listen, I'm not going to get into the drama behind the scenes of working at Marvel. That could
Mm,
be a different podcast. But
mm, mm,
I was there for a couple of years, and then the pandemic hit,
mm.
and I quit within the year. And then I moved into what I'm doing now, which is production management and production coordination. So I work
Very
more
interesting.
so with producers rather than like with hosts or with guests. It's a little bit more of like a overseeing managerial position where you're like dealing with schedules, supporting, making sure like workflows are working in the way you want them to. A lot of like Google Drive and Dropbox
Right,
organization, that
right,
kind of stuff.
right.
But I like it. I like it a lot.
Very cool. Okay, so this is the reason why I love having this show is that my point of view for you, Percia, is a totally different world, right? Obviously, I did some homework and I knew a little bit about this kind of stuff, right? But to
Mm,
hear it coming from you, it's very fascinating because the reason why I have you on the show primarily, the podcast is called Beyond the Garment. The reason why I have you is because I care about your style, your fashion, your mind, and towards the creative pursuit that is wearing clothes and dressing up and understanding the history and understanding sustainability and fashion, this kind of thing.
hmm
But now, in hearing about the aspect of producer, podcast, um, audio, whatever, all the blanket terms of what it is. It's just very fascinating, and it's really cool to have someone on the show who has such a breadth of interests. And I think that the world we live in and like the current landscape of like being someone who puts their personality online, having these elements a part of your background is it just adds another layer to the intrigue for me. And for the audience too. Hopefully they kind of will get that. So there's this whole podcasting world side to you, obviously, this whole producer world, obviously your job, what you do. But I'm actually really, really curious. Let's take it back, right? Because the way I like to structure the episode, the way I like to structure the podcast is that I want people to get a full, as much as they can, a full scope, a full scale of who is Percia Verlin, right? That's really important to me. And I always start out with this question that kind of takes it back to childhood because I recognize that the things that happen in your childhood are a lot of times a huge influence on the person and the thoughts and the actions that you take behind how you are as an adult. So
Yeah.
I know a little bit about where you're from, but I'm excited to hear about this. Talk to us about, where you're from and how is it like for you to grow up as a kid?
Yeah, I think this is a little bit of a joke. I think it depends on where you're from, but I'm from Philly, and I feel like it's a little bit of a joke. Like if you're from Philly, especially, I think people say it about if you're from New York, you're always talking about how you're from New York, right? That's like the joke about J-Lo. She's always talking about how she's from the Bronx. I'm always talking about how I'm from Philly.
Mm,
And so it's not a secret at all, but I was born and raised and grew up in Philly and went to college in Philly. So I lived in Philly for, 21 years of my
mm,
life. And I grew up in the downtown area, which is not so common. People like in my area specifically, like it felt like we knew all the kids who were my age. Like
mm.
we knew most of the kids in the area just because there weren't that many kids growing up in that downtown place. And I grew up, sorry, I think someone is running fucking leaf blower.
Honestly, you sound butter. Don't even worry about
Okay,
it.
don't
I
worry
would let
about
you
it.
know. Yeah, I would let you know.
And I don't know if
Mhm.
you do any audio processing, but I can also run my track through something before I send it to
For sure. We can get it smoothed
you.
up whatever way
Sorry.
you want.
Um, and what was I saying? Oh, right. So I would say the other important thing about my childhood is birth order.
Mm,
I have four brothers, and two of my brothers are not blood related to me. That is a long story, but essentially, I have three older brothers and one younger brother, and my younger brother is 8 years younger than me. So I was
wow.
the only girl and the youngest for 8 years, and I was like a royal terror. Everyone talks about how horrible I was as a kid, like horrible to deal with, like couldn't be talked to at all, like no one could tell me what to do. I would just like scream and like freak out about everything. And actually, one of the big things, which this is, I think, an issue for, sorry. This is, I think, an issue with a lot of kids is what do you fight with your parents about most? Probably what you're eating and what you're wearing.
Yep.
Every day your parents are fighting with you about what you're eating and what you're wearing. And I fought with my mom all the time about what I was wearing. Um, I think
Mm,
I remember having specific tastes like in elementary school. I remember having clothes that I was really attached to. I think I had like a little vest that I wore all the time that was like the night sky. It had like little stars on it, and I loved
right.
that. Very
Hmm.
elementary school pick. Um, and then I went through like a real resistance phase where I only wanted to wear my brother's old clothes, and I just wore their hand-me-downs day in and day out. And my grandmother and my mom, I think they were fine with it. My grandmother a little less so. But every now and then, you have to go to a nicer event,
Yeah.
like, I don't know, my cousin's bat mitzvah or something, and they're like, you
Mm.
have to wear a dress. And I was like, over my dead body. And I fought them on that, I think until I was about 11 or 12. And I remember this very clearly. I was going to summer camp and we were dropping off my brothers on like the boys' side of the camp, and
Right.
some little kids, I overheard them talking about me and they were like, "Is that a boy or a girl?" And I was like, "It's time." And I like let my grandmother buy me like Sophie shorts, if you
Mhm.
remember Sophie
Yep.
shorts.
Yep. Hmm.
And like little like baby tees
Yep.
instead of like basketball shorts and like large tees that I was wearing. And it was just like, you could draw a lot of fake parallels between your life. Confirmation bias can do a lot for you in your personal mythologizing.
Yep.
But yeah, just not the items of clothing you're wearing, but the shape of the clothing that you're wearing can
Totally.
change so much.
Yeah, totally. Totally. It seems like from a young age, and tell me if I'm wrong here, clothing, like the two elements, what you eat and what you wear, those were some of the interactions that stood out to you the most. Obviously, our point of view for this episode is clothing.
Right.
Um, and it's interesting having being a youngest daughter and then having another younger brother, basically being surrounded by boys. Um, it's an interesting trope. It's an interesting storyline,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
no, yeah, talk to me. Like how do you like when you think about that now, like having all brothers as siblings and like the interactions with your brothers and like obviously the moments where like people are a little bit coming at you for the fact that you have this maybe more like masculine approach to dressing, whatever that may be for whatever age range that is. Like, do you probably still see that effect on you today? No, or is it something where you've recognized it and you're kind of like, this is a very interesting part of my past, but I don't really bring it into the present.
I think many things about this, which is one thing I want to point out is I noticed this recently. Almost all my very close friends, my very close female friends, also only have brothers. Maybe they don't have as many brothers as I did, but
Mm,
most of my female friends only have brothers, no sisters. Maybe they'll have one or just two brothers at most, but they only have brothers. And there is no consistency between us in terms of like style and presentation. So just having brothers, this is my very small sample size, my experiment that I'm doing based off of, pattern recognition, but
yeah.
I I can't say that that is enough to change someone's external presentation or change someone's style significantly.
Mm,
Though I sh I think it is part of it. I think it has an effect. Um, it's hard to say if the brother thing is like what I'm bringing into my present, or if it's just so hard to say what caused what, It's
yeah.
just maybe that's who I was, because besides just having brothers, I mean, my mom is very feminine, and she she would do the things that a lot of parents do to their female children, which is, sit still, please be quiet, like
Yeah.
talk softly. She would tell me like this is kind of how a lady behaves, and I didn't like any of that. Obviously, I think most girls don't, even if
Yeah.
you do go on to be rather feminine. I think most people don't like being told by their moms to speak softly,
To do anything,
to
honestly.
do anything, honestly. Yeah. Um, Point blank.
Yeah.
It but I also was raised to play sports and to be competitive and to be somewhat aggressive. I was raised in a family where we are kind of loud and argumentative and like forceful in our opinions.
Totally.
And so some of it, yeah, I think it's just such a mix of culture. I think it's just such a mix of culture and upbringing
Yeah.
and brothers. And And it could be anything. I mean, it could be the way I was born to a
Yeah.
certain degree. It's
Nature,
really
nature and nurture, right? I mean,
nature and nurture. It's really hard to say. But
yeah.
as my dad has always said, whether it's nature or nurture, it's my fault. So God bless him for owning up to that.
Do you have a good relationship with your dad?
Yeah, I have a great relationship with my dad.
Good.
Gotta be daddy's little girl.
Love
But
it.
my family in general is very, very close. Um,
Yeah.
we all live on the East Coast. Three of my brothers live in Philly. One of them lives in DC. And
Wow. Very close.
yeah,
And you
yeah.
live in New York.
So, and I live in New York, exactly. So New York is great because it's easy to get back and forth,
Yeah.
but my parents also can come by. DC, I think, is a little farther for them, but my parents will be like, "Oh, we're coming for the day." They will
Yeah.
drive up and then drive back down in a day. So
I love it.
it's it's sometimes can be too close for comfort, but not usually.
That's good. That's good. It's good to have a good relationship with your fam. I
Yeah, of
um
course.
I miss
Do
mine.
you have siblings?
I have a so I grew up an only child, but I have a half brother. And so the the only child trope, which a lot of people tell me about whenever
Uh-oh.
I talk to them, is that
Yeah.
I'm a weirdo, I'm selfish,
Yeah.
I'm X, Y, and Z.
hmm
And sometimes
You
it
don't
does play out.
identify?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it plays out. I have my girlfriend, like she's the youngest
hmm
sibling of she has an older brother and an older sister. And like
Yeah.
sometimes our personalities clash just off of the reactions that I may have to a situation
Yeah.
where because I've been so singular, I've had to always be uh on my feet and think quickly about, okay, if we're gonna do something, we're gonna do it this way because I have to be able to fit into a social environment that's not always gonna be as comforting because I don't have people around me who are my siblings or something like that who can help me. Or
Yeah.
if I'm doing something, sometimes I have a more like I guess silver bullet approach versus trying to like accommodate everyone else's needs, which is really
hmm
interesting.
Yeah.
But that's a whole a personal
No,
psychoanalysis for another day.
I think the way people feel about astrology in some ways is the way I feel about birth order and like sibling gender. I think it does
True,
so much for our
true,
development.
so
And I'm
true.
actually also dating an only child,
Really.
and one of my brothers is dating an only child. So there might be something in there
Mm.
for compatibility. You
For
never know.
compatibility, because like as an only child, like you don't want to be alone anymore. It's
Please,
tiring.
someone hang out with me. The
No,
one
no,
thing I
no,
would
no.
always say, which I don't know how you feel about this as a sort
Mm,
of like tastemaker, is as someone with a lot of siblings, especially older siblings, I very, very infrequently had to go out and find culture for myself. Like the music I listened to was what my brothers put on. The
right.
TV we watched was what my brothers put on. The video games I played, mostly what my brothers were playing. Like I was very fine with that. Like it didn't bother me really. And my
Yeah.
parents were also very forward with their taste. My parents would give us books to read, movies to watch. So as an adult, in some ways, I feel a little bit like, oh, I have to make this happen for myself. Like you really have to go out and find influences and
Yeah.
find references. And it's a lot of work, honestly. I think I was really, in some ways, living the easy life with everything sort of spoon-fed to me.
That's an interesting point. That's a really interesting point. You have to, as an only child, and not just as an only child, you can have siblings and have the same quality and trait. But I know that for me, like being a self-starter, being someone who is really locked into their own personal interests and needs, and I think at some point, as you grow up, you begin to, tune into the story that you're writing about yourself, right? So like at some point you kind of have this awareness, whether it's in high school or middle school or college or after high school, whatever it is, and you start to understand, okay, I like these sort of things. I want to engage in these sort of things. And for me, I always had this, I mean, it's a bit cocky to say that you had a high level of self-awareness, but I tried, and I think I tried to have a high level of self-awareness because I knew that, for me, if I'm in a situation where I'm in class, like a new class or something like that, and I want to make friends, or if I'm in a new school or a new environment, a new basketball team, and I need to fit in, like I have to understand very quickly the dynamics of a group. And even still
hmm
to this day, like my ability at times to understand group dynamics when it comes to like my girlfriend's family versus her understanding the group dynamics of my family, or whether it be going to an event here in New York City, or whether it be, like you said, pattern recognition for trends or pattern recognition for what's going on. Even and I'm obviously like this is like being very a little bit like high on my ego, but like even having the understanding to have this conversation with you in the sense that like I mean I think that what you're doing in terms of your content is something that is there's a high level of resonance for me and for a lot of people. Obviously like you create great work, and so like being able to recognize these things and in people in particular who aren't the biggest influencers or the biggest creators in the world, who aren't the wisdom Ks or whatever it may be, and recognizing that, well, there's people like Percia Verlin who are doing great work, who are also really, really talented, and being able to highlight them. I think that's a part of what I would say is my superpower, a little bit, I would hope. So
I appreciate that.
of
I mean,
course,
yeah, listen, I'm small potatoes. It's crazy that you even let me on this podcast.
no, a lot of people say that until, I see them 5 months from now, and I'm like, yeah, I knew.
You were like, I called it, yeah.
Yeah, I knew.
Well, I hope so.
I knew. I knew.
I had a question for you. Gosh,
Talk
and
to
now I
me.
don't remember.
I'm getting interviewed now, guys. See, I told you this would happen.
I guess, oh, I now I remember. My thing, I guess this is also introspective, which is a lot of my content is about references because I believe in the quote of the moment right now. You think you just fell out of the coconut tree. You exist in the content. I don't even remember the quote, but you know what she's saying. I have a really sincere belief in that. I don't
Yeah,
think that anything I do is a vacuum. I honestly don't think anything I personally do is unique or groundbreaking. I think
yeah,
that I'm just like mired. I have a very strong belief in the sort of social connections we have in this world influencing who we are and our work. And I think it's really hard to divorce yourself from that. I think there are people who are iconoclasts and who are really independent and really creative thinkers.
yeah.
And I personally see myself as more of like someone who is what's the word? Like more of an analyst almost. But I don't love, I'm not like so interested in like trends per se, but just like an analyst of like different I don't know, an analyst of like a specific person's personal style or an
Hmm.
analyst of a specific aesthetic or just I also really love history, so looking through like the historical roots of something is a great interest of mine. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Did you have a question at the end of that?
yeah,
Or
I guess yeah, you because you were saying like you feel like you know or you had a stronger feeling about like your direction at a young age. And maybe do you feel like you were looking for that internally or you feel like you just had such a grasp on your external references and your external inspirations that you could
so it's a that's a very, very loaded question. And sorry, I didn't mean to be rude when I said, is there a question at the end of that? That
No,
sounded kind
I didn't get there. You're right.
of um that's a really interesting question. The answer is no. I mean, there's the person I am today, who is Drew Joyner on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. This person has only been in development. I would say this current version of me has only been in development since the pandemic, right?
Hmm.
And so what that means is that there was no grandiose, grand plan or grand idea about, how I was going to develop these elements of personal style. To me, my idea about it was I followed the next logical step in a
No,
progression, right? And
every
so
step of the way. You're
every
like
step
you
of the
see the
way,
next step in front of you.
correct. I see the next step in front of me, right? So when I started creating content, it was for a brand that I wanted to start, which was a
Right.
namesake brand that was called Edward Joyner. And then when I started the podcast, it's because, hmm, I'm not really in the fashion industry. I graduated with a marketing degree. I'm a business first kind of guy. I understand some things about business from business school, but obviously, like the actual tactics and details of starting and growing a business is much different from being in a class with a case study. And then when I started my podcast and when I started talking about fashion, it was because I wanted to learn. right? I wanted to learn from individuals like yourself. And I still feel that way today. Like, I feel like there's so much to learn and so much to grasp from someone like yourself who has this kind of unique perspective, who has a unique look and unique aspects to them. And I did that for my business. And then the next logical step was, okay, if I'm learning something, how do I apply my knowledge? I teach others. I try to attempt to teach others, right? And so
Right.
that's why I
Yeah.
started making YouTube videos. And then from
Right.
there, you make the next logical step over and over and over again. The logical step, the idea of it being logical is all about, my point of view, right? Because everyone has
Right.
a
Of
different
course.
logical step.
Yeah.
Um, but that's what I did, and that's why I have done what I've done over the last 3.5, almost 4 years now.
Yeah. I have a
Yeah.
question that may be a little bit maybe too revealing,
Oh,
but my feeling as a content creator, I'm doing quote hands, um, is that most content creators do it for the love of the game and not exactly the love of the exact creative medium they're using. So what I mean by that is I think some of the best content creators are good at content creation.
mm,
And I'm not saying that to minimize the aspects of your personal style, which I think are obviously excellent, but many people have amazing personal style, but you don't get to a certain level until you are, in some ways, a business person, until you are, some ways, a producer, that you are thinking about these things analytically. I think that's a little bit of a less romantic point of view that these, because it made me think about it recently because I was watching an interview with Victoria Paris,
yep.
and she, I think, was also some sort of business or econ major
Yes,
in
makes sense.
college.
Yep.
And she thinks of this obviously now, but at the beginning, she was thinking about this as a business.
Yeah.
She was always thinking about her platform as a business.
Yep.
And I think that I know, I feel like people don't necessarily want to hear that, but I think that is a huge, important skill set. And it does lead to success. And I don't think we should undersell that. And I think it's almost a little, almost it's like a nice white
Mm,
lie to tell people, like, if you just do what you love, it'll work out. I'm sure that does happen.
hmm
Maybe it does. But I think like content creation is an art in itself.
yeah.
The art of fashion or the art of style is one thing, but the art of content creation, of putting yourself out on the internet, of making videos, of making um short form content is its own skill.
Totally. I agree. And it's you're right. I mean, there's the idea that you can go out and just do what you love, make videos about what you love is is a bit fairy tale in some aspects, right? Because the initial maybe starting point can be about doing something that you care about, doing something that interests you. But there are so many, and it's hard to even wrap them up. That's why I try to be as, and with the podcast, I try to be as deliberate for those who actually care about this. There's so many skills that you have to acquire along the way. Like one of the best analogies I can think about for this journey that I've been on is that you're a mountain climber, you're a hiker of some sort, right? I grew up in
Hmm.
Colorado, right? And so
Right.
like when you hike, you start at the base or the trailhead of a mountain, and your objective is to reach the top, Pikes Peak, right? A
Hmm.
14er. Your objective is to reach the top. And it's the same thing when you're starting or creating content. Your objective is to reach the top, whatever that proverbial top is for you. It could be a follower count, it could be a brand opportunity, it could be a certain level of recognition by the audience. Whatever that is, you want to reach that goal for yourself, right? That's not necessarily as important. The goal is not necessarily as important, but the journey is very important. And as you're climbing to the top of this mountain, both proverbially and literally, if you're climbing a mountain, you're gaining skills along the way that will help you when you're 1,000 feet in versus when you're 2,000 versus when you're 3,000 versus when you're 10,000 feet in. The skills
Yeah.
that you gain when you're 1,000 feet in will still apply to the skills that you gain when they're 10,000. But it takes a lot of fucking work to even get to 1,000 feet. Right.
Right.
And a lot of people don't understand the level of effort sometimes it can take. It depends on who you are. Obviously, certain individuals it takes a little bit less, others it takes more because there's talents and there's skills and there's all these things. There's the market, there's the content you make at the time, what you're interested in and what the
Yeah.
actual audience wants to see, the level of fatigue that the audience is feeling, and with
Hmm.
short form, all these things are all happening at the same exact time, right? And so for me, like, it's interesting you bring up Victoria Paris. I've had Ethan Glenn on the podcast, who is
Hmm.
someone who's good friends with Victoria.
Yeah.
She's very interesting because I think her rise, especially I remember like when she was rising on TikTok, and a lot of publications and different news articles were talking about her like style of content was going to become the new norm for what it meant to be like short form vlogging and like just
Yeah.
everyday posting. She posted like I mean 20
Like 20,
videos.
30 times a day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was just insane. I mean, I that to me is unbelievable. But she it would make sense that she always thought of it as a business. It
Yeah.
really would make sense if she always thought of it as a business. And I wouldn't say that necessarily for me. I mean, I started it as a way to help my business, but I always like for me, I always looked up to the creators I looked up to when I was starting out were people like Ray Mia, who was
Hmm.
a another New York City kind of creative who has his own brand. He had a YouTube channel. He has a magazine now. And Ray, when I was watching his videos before I started, he always talked about this idea that, he just truly cares about certain things within product. And that always really resonated with me. And that's always been kind of my North Star. And I
Hmm.
hope and I think that North Star is still present in me today. There's a lot of I guess other
Meandering.
ancillary things going on like the brand opportunities and
Right.
Ralph Lauren and things that I've been able to do, especially now living in New York City.
Right.
Um, but I hope it's still the same. It's a good question.
Are you still working on your brand? Or are you sort of like, this is what I see for you. Maybe I'm wrong,
Mm,
but you're like, you're growing, you're growing, you're growing, you're growing. At a certain point, you're gonna be like, okay, now I have such a platform that I can go back to this.
yeah.
And you'll probably be more successful just based off of the platform that you have now.
Mm,
Um, is that you think in the cards? Is that what you're thinking?
that's in my cards. That's
Okay.
that's stage 7. We're at stage 3.
Okay. So
I'm
farther
just
on
kidding.
then.
Yeah, it'll at some point that is the goal. But right
That's
now,
gonna be like, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead, ask your question.
I feel you're like, okay, ask your questions. I feel like that's gonna be one of those classic, like, oh, overnight sensation, when in fact you've been thinking about having a brand for like 10 years. And then when you have a brand 10 years from the initial idea, people are gonna be like, wow, he just like knows how to make a brand. Like that's amazing. He's such like a singular talent.
That's such a high compliment. Thank you. I hope so. I hope
But
so.
it's gonna be that you've been thinking about it intentionally for 10 years, right? I just think that
Yeah.
like that sort of invisible work always goes to the side.
No, you're right. You're right. I have been thinking about it. I know that for whenever I decide to do something with physical products again,
Yeah.
it's gonna take a second for me to really nail it in because
Yeah.
right now my focus is very singular. It is to create and to have the best content, the best videos, the best
Right.
ideas displayed on the internet as I possibly can. Whether that
Yeah.
means being the voice of the internet when it comes to creating audios, whether that means having the most dynamic and interesting outfit checks that I possibly can for my level of style or for my level of interest, whether that means having the most genuine conversations as I can on my podcast. All of these things are tool building for climbing up that mountain, in my opinion. We'll
Yeah.
see if it plans out. I mean, all you can do is work to the level that you can work at, and you'll see.
Absolutely.
Hopefully it does.
I think
So
so.
let me start asking you some questions here, okay? This is
Uh-huh.
this is the episode is gonna say Percia Verlin. It's not gonna. I mean, it is gonna say disclaimer.
You just put me first.
Yeah, you gotta put you first. So I want to know. So kind of going back. I mean, this is really fun. You talked about Philly. You talked about childhood. Let's get into your personal style. Let's get into to your mind when it comes to fashion, right?
Yeah.
I think you have such a dynamic personal style. And I think what we get to see now from your current evolution, because I scrolled back and looked at
Oh
some of the
yeah.
posts from
Oh
long,
no.
long, long time, just to get an idea.
Yeah,
How do you
that
think you've
was
been able to develop, your taste within fashion and actually execute on some of the ideas that you have for your style?
yeah. I think I just want to preface this by saying that when I started my TikTok, which the first social media content I ever really made was on TikTok. Actually, that's not true. I had a Tumblr for a very long time.
Ooh.
So it probably really does all start on Tumblr. And if you talk to more old heads like me, a lot of us started on Tumblr. But I didn't post that much. I think I like in a fantasy world was gonna be like more of a Tumblr celebrity, but I think the only thing that ever did numbers for me was like anime screenshots. Um
That's funny.
yeah, and yeah, so Tumblr didn't happen for me, obviously. And then I sort of stopped using Tumblr probably 2014, just around there when I think everyone else also stopped using it. But TikTok came on the scene for me during the pandemic,
Right.
like during quarantine. Similarly for you, I think it was a great source of entertainment, but then I was also just so bored. And the very first stuff I was making on TikTok was like vibey, I guess I would call it. It was like, kind of like different shots of like my daily life. It was like
Yeah.
very landscape oriented, I would
Mm.
say. Like, oh, this is like a pretty tree and sidewalk kind of
Got
stuff.
you. Got you.
So I was totally unorganized when I started. I was just like doing it out of the pure, joy of my heart for filming random videos. And this is going to sound the opposite of what I was talking about in terms of intentionality, but I think I just recorded like one or two videos where I was like, oh, it's so hard to like get dressed these days because it's like, where are we going? So I recorded a video, was like, oh, I'll record myself getting dressed as like a motivation to like wake up in the morning and like actually put clothes on.
Right.
And those videos like did the best out of anything I had ever posted. That's talking about like getting 2 likes versus like 20 likes. But at that point, that was really noticeable. That was really notable for me.
Yeah.
Um, and then, oh my God, you know what was my first viral video?
What was it?
It was, you might not remember this trend, but the Rasputin song, like
Yeah.
rah rah Rasputin.
Rasputin.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
was a trend, someone like had like choreographed a tiny little dance to that, and it was a guy, and all these guys were doing it where you like did a little dance and then you like flexed your arms or whatever. And I was like, okay. And so I did it. And then everybody, of course, was like, oh my God, more women need to do this trend. Like, people were calling
I
me like
love it.
Cora, I guess, because they couldn't think of any other women who had like muscular arms. And that did not have to do with clothing per se. But I realized like I think is a hard pill to swallow, which is if you put yourself in front of the camera, people are always going to be more interested in you than like something sort of abstract.
Mm, totally.
But for me, I mean, like the abstract stuff was kind of my love in a weird way. Um, so for a long time, I really hesitated like wanting to do fashion per se, because something about my background is that my mom is very fashionable. Um, but she's never talked about brands one day in her life. She does not care about designer.
Mm.
She has never been like, oh, I'm like waiting for the new drop from Nike, like she was just not paying attention to that. She was very, very um just ruled by like her taste and her, she was like did not shop online ever.
Mm.
She was vehemently against shopping online. She was like, I don't understand why people do it, because she wanted to be in a store and try things on and touch the fabric. And she was just very like intuition based. I mean, intuition almost makes it seem like less um intelligent that it is. But she has an amazing personal style, and it has been consistent for as far as I can tell her whole life. Um, and so the joke in my family was like, "Oh, you don't really take after your mother, do you?"
Ow.
Oh, and yeah, and my mom was just very glamorous, and I was like a little bit of a ugly duckling,
Oh my
and
gosh.
I was like fine with that in the way that you're like, yeah, I don't want to be like, right. So you like distance your when you are told that you're not something, you like double down in a lot of ways. I think that's true for anything. If you told you're not good at math, you're like, well, fuck math. I'm not going to try in math class.
Yep.
Um, and I was told, yeah, that I like wasn't really fashionable or glamorous like my mother was, and I was like, absolutely not. And I will show you how far from that I am. And so I was always very hyper focused on comfort, on functionality. That is something that I still talk a lot about, still talk about a lot today.
Mm,
Um, because I have a theory that because I never got into dressing, like, because I never forced myself to not dress for comfort, it's too late for me.
yeah.
Like, I
It's
just
gotta have
can't,
comfort for you.
yeah, I just like I never got used to it. So I have to wear shoes that are comfortable. I have to wear, jackets that aren't like too tight around the shoulders. Like I can't do it and I never got used to it. And I think in some ways conditioning, it can be any gender, but conditioning people to feel to wear clothes that may be uncomfortable for the style needs to happen at a certain point or it won't happen at all.
It's true. Yeah.
Potentially. Sorry, my phone is buzzing. Um
No, you're fine.
Anyway, so that is all to say, I started my TikTok with no intentionality. I did not want to do fashion. I found it to be sort of like antithetical to who I am in a certain way.
Mm,
But I think the more I explored that point of view, the more I found people who actually identified with that point of view. And that was a big eye opener is that even though I may not exactly be making content in the way that is mainstream for women or people assigned female at birth, there is a whole other host of people who feel, yes, I do want to dress a certain way. I do want to look a certain way. I want to feel a certain way in my clothing, but it has to be function forward. It has to be comfortable. It has to work for my everyday life. I don't want it to be expensive. There's
yeah.
like a whole host of things to keep in mind. And I think like finding that audience was really a revelation.
Yeah, totally. I think the thing is, I'm a part of your audience, and I love the fact how, and you didn't touch on this. You touched on it earlier, but not in this segment, which is, your ability to analyze a particular individual's style and then kind of break down why it works for them in terms of personal style and why maybe
Mm,
you would do it slightly different if you're pulling as a reference point is
mm,
really fascinating. And it's not something that when and you still see these kind of videos where people say, oh, I want to dress like, sometimes
so
it's a
and so.
bit, yeah, exactly. Sometimes it's a bit, I guess extravagant or grandiose. I want to dress like, Ferb from Phineas and Ferb, and someone will make an outfit like that. Or so I want to
Yeah,
dress like Thanos, and they do something crazy, right? Or
right,
a manga or an anime.
right.
But for you, obviously, you take your references from the individuals and people who you've always admired from a personal style standpoint.
Yeah.
And I find like your references, like when I watch a video when you reference someone's style, someone who maybe I just wasn't in my wheelhouse of interest, I think that's where I gain a lot of the value for your content as
Mm,
well, is where I learned about someone who, oh wow, this is a whole different world that I'm not even paying attention to currently,
yeah.
that I haven't really been referencing, and that if Percia can derive value from it and create such a really beautiful outfit and something that as a guy, I mean, the more and more I spend time on social media and whether it be short form videos, the more and more I realize that for me, like the idea that like menswear styling is the only type of styling that I should be looking at is it's totally being destroyed, because
Right.
you and a lot of other creators are doing is there's this really beautiful like mix mash crisscross of this idea that there is no really distinguished set in stone line for gendered clothing.
Yeah.
And so it's really cool to have your perspective and to not only have your perspective, but it's important when you put something out there. Like it is important as an individual to like feel as though like your ideas are being recognized at some level. Even if you weren't at 70,000 like you are on or however many 70 something thousand like you are on Instagram and however much you are on TikTok and YouTube, maybe you were only at 10,000 and every video was getting, whatever appropriate rate it would be getting at that level. Like it's nice to be able to have some level of community towards the ideas that you put out. Would you say so, or is that not as important for you?
No, I actually think community is sort of the most important thing for me. A lot of times I'll tell my partner, I'm like, people are liking the video, but no one's talking to me. I say that all the time. I'm like, I want chatter. Give me conversation. I want to hear what other people think. That's
W's in the
like,
chat.
and I know, that's obviously like an engagement aspect, which is very important for numbers and stuff. But for me, it's just like, it's not interesting to see likes go up. It's not like necessarily interesting to see your follower count go up. Like those things are obviously good
Yeah,
per se, but it's not what I find engaging about doing this as a pastime.
totally.
I want to hear what people think. Absolutely, like number one, that is my number one form of feedback that I enjoy is communication about the ideas that I'm putting out. I'm like, I just had this idea. I'm not even trying to tell you guys that this idea is right or this is the idea or this is the thing that you should be doing. I have an idea and I want to hear what you think about it. Do you
Yeah.
agree? Do you not agree? And that partly came from the fact that I don't really actually have a lot of friends who are super interested in fashion. All
Mm,
my friends have personal style and actually have a really good idea, I think, about the way they want to dress themselves, and they're very consistent, but they're not so interested in like analyzing or theorizing about it, and they're not as knowledgeable about like brands or designers or anything like that.
yeah.
And that's fine for me. I do always think it's funny when influencers are like posting pictures of their like really cool hip friend groups. Not to say my friends aren't cool or hip, but it's just like we're not like an aesthetic walking around as
Facts.
like a 5-10 person group.
It's
In New
true.
York City, we're normal people. That's like
Yeah.
kind of one of my things is just like my apartment looks normal. My friend group looks normal. Like I don't know what to say about it.
Ugh, that's
I don't
so
think it's
good.
bad. I just think it's real. Like I'm
Yeah.
not, no offense, I'm not like going out to like find like cool looking friends. My friends I made because of like certain connections or things we do together, or like, I have friends from college and elementary school, and then I have friends of their friends. I have friends that I made because they went to school with my brother. Like those are how I made my friends. I
It's
think
the
that's like
real deal.
it's
Yeah.
extremely normal.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like so basic.
And it's true because, like, I mean, I think you said it. Most of the world, and I think this is for most of the world. Like, people, everyone has to care a little bit about fashion because it's a bit of a social decorum. Like,
Yeah.
you can't come to a job, you can't hang out with anyone without a level of presence about yourself. You got to smell relatively good. You can't smell bad.
Yeah.
You got to have a little bit of attention with your hair. You got to
Yeah.
smile. That's most of the world. Like the things where you start to get into like niche groups where you start talking about fashion, that's when you have a specific interest in it. And I think
Yeah.
that it's not for everyone to necessarily have that interest. But
Yeah.
and this is just me talking, like as someone who creates videos, my hope is that, if there's an idea or there's a particular aspect of style that you're interested in, or I can challenge you on to make you stop and think while you're scrolling, like
Mm,
that's the really beautiful aspect of social media.
totally.
I want to ask you about I want to ask you about this idea of like brand influences, like your actual like personal taste influences. I want to talk to you about the city boy a little bit
Yes,
and
sure.
that you said that your mom, her style was something that was noteworthy, but she never really focused on brands, never
Mm,
really focused on specific designers or pieces like that. Obviously, she cared about being in store and feeling the fabric and all those kind of really tangible or tactile or tangible. Is that the right word? I don't know. All the things where you get to touch stuff, aspect to it. For you, how are you engaging in the fashion world, being in New York City when it comes to like actual products? And then we'll talk about City Boys. How are you engaging with fashion? And
yeah.
like, what are the things that you're interested in as I'm calling you a fashion MF, but I mean, I don't know if that's appropriate.
I'll take it. I so in terms of shopping, I always thrift shopped. Though that's not to say I didn't go to Urban Outfitters and like H&M. Because I grew up in the city and I didn't have a car and I didn't learn how to drive until I graduated college. And to this day, I mean, did I learn how to drive?
I was gonna ask you.
Not really. I have
Can
my
you actually
license.
drive?
Can I actually drive? No.
Uh,
Can I legally be on the road? Yes. Morally, absolutely not. It's I learned to drive like also from my friends who grew up in New Jersey. And
oh
listen,
gosh.
I love Jersey people to death, but they drive like maniacs. So anyway, I essentially didn't have access to mall brands, is what I would say. So there were some brands that were like had a lot of intrigue to me, like PacSun or Delia's. You're getting an idea for my age group here. Abercrombie and Fitch, Hollister, even like oh my God, what's the emo one? Um, I can't believe I'm forgetting. But where people bought
I
like,
know.
what is it called?
I know. Hot Topic.
Hot Topic, that's what it was. So I never like we didn't have those stores in town, essentially. They
Mm,
did have them at the mall, which I went to every so often, sometimes like with my grandparents, but essentially I was not shopping at those stores. What we had in town were thrift stores. We had vintage stores. Buffalo Exchange was the big one for my high school. And there was also there's this vintage store on South Street in Philly called Retrospect. And we went there a lot. And they have very classic like 80s, 70s. Like everything is like real polyester, like when they
mm,
first discovered polyester.
mm.
A lot of terry cloth, a lot of flannels, cowboy boots, like real classic vintage. Um, but like not even particularly like good quality vintage. You know what I mean?
Totally.
I don't wear polyester anymore. I feel like I kind of sucked it up for that time period, but I was like, why am I buying this stuff? Like you can't sweat in it
No, not at all.
or you can sweat in it very efficiently.
Yeah.
Um, and I also I didn't have an allowance growing up, and my family like never struggled. We had ups and downs like any family, but my parents, for whatever culture reasons or how they were raised, they were not very much like, oh, here's my credit card, go spend money on it. And they did not give us an allowance. So pretty much all the money I had was money I had made. I was a student teacher at my synagogue.
Wow.
I know, Judaism. And that was super and that was like oh my God, I made like $40 every Sunday. Like that was it.
Mm,
So oh, and I babysat my because my little brother was so young, I essentially learned how to babysit at a very young age. And I started babysitting at like 12, essentially.
right.
So that was the cash I had. And with that on hand, Urban Outfitters is a little expensive. But every now and then my parents would buy me something from there or like I would splurge and like get a dress for like a dance.
Mm,
And velvet was big back then. I think I remember I got like a plaid, almost like gingham kind of mini dress from Urban Outfitters for one of my dances. Um, so I think that's like when I was like going out. That's what I was buying. But it was very common like after school to like go visit a couple of stores or like go shopping together and we would just walk around or take the subway or take the bus to go. So I always had that sort of like city living shopping style. Um when I moved to New York City, I kind of kept the same energy, but I essentially stopped shopping at like new clothing stores. Like, what's the word for not vintage shopping?
yeah.
I essentially at a certain point, I think in college, I kind of just was only thrift shopping. And at that point I was like really thrift shopping. I was like going to the Salvation Army. There was like a random thrift store near where I went to school. And and I have to say I don't remember being like this is the best thing for the environment. I don't remember being like this is sustainability. I'm a sustainability queen.
Mm.
I think I was just like this is cheap. I was like, this is affordable. And I've talked about this before. I've always lived with a healthy dose, I've always lived with a healthy dose of not being like other people, quote unquote. So just like coming from Philly, having those sort of like hipster roots where, everything was like an ironic t-shirt or like weird flannels or like Vans that you like beat up to death. Like that's just kind of the time and culture I came from, that was what was in in some ways. It's funny because a lot of people say that, oh, when I was in high school, you wouldn't be caught dead wearing someone else's clothes. When I was in high school, it was cool to wear someone else's clothes. I think that's maybe just being like a public school in Philadelphia, that it's just was very normalized. So when I went to college, I was also meeting a lot of people who grew up not like me, who grew up in the suburbs, who grew up just in a little bit less like alternative scenes. And I think I was like, oh, well, I'm not assimilating, was my feeling about it. I was like, I am going to thrift even harder. Just you wait. I wore like my grandmother's huge swing shearling coat and like boots. And I think that was the era of mom jeans. So like
Mm,
90s kind of like gray mom jeans. And I had my hair long at that point. So that was kind of my like college uniform. And then when I got to New York City, I kept that energy, though it's hard to thrift in New York. It's hard to thrift in New York City. I think everybody will agree on that. A lot of the places are picked over. But I one of my jobs was near a Salvation Army that has like multiple floors. And so I used to go just sort of like after work, just like for 30 minutes. This is like what they say that you should actually do when you're thrifting is go to a couple of thrift stores like every day or like just multiple times, as many times as you can, because things turn over so quickly and you're just like hunting in the dark for a diamond. So I really was about that for a time period. And I was like working part-time. I was nannying. I was working at this audio production studio that did like sound design for ads. And so I was just very much like had time, had interest,
yeah.
was like happy to be out all day walking around Manhattan, whatever. Um, when I started my corporate job at Marvel, I like lost a lot of time and a lot of flexibility. And so that's when I started eBay.
Mm.
I was eBay pilled. I don't
eBay
remember.
enters the chat.
eBay enters the chat. It happens to us all, or maybe not all of us, but it happens to a special few.
It's
And
happened to me.
once you're in, it's hard to get out, I have to say. It's pretty addicting because you can find stuff for so cheap. And I mean, buying anything online is sort of a risk, but because things on eBay, you can find such good deals, you're like, I gotta say, I think it's like betting on the horses. I think you're like really gambling. I think it's
uh,
like in some ways the same addictive feeling as gambling, where you're like, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna buy it. We'll see what it's like. And sometimes you hit and sometimes you don't.
mm,
Um, and yeah, that's when I started shopping online. Just because I had like a corporate quote unquote job, and then of course the pandemic and we were in quarantine, so you couldn't really go anywhere to shop anyway. And yeah, I would say shopping has a lot to do with how much time you have.
totally. And I know you just spilled a lot
Oh,
of the beans
yeah,
about your
I get,
story.
sorry, I gave you like a weird shopping
No,
timeline.
no, it's good. I'm curious to know too, like when you were in these thrift stores, when you were and are shopping on eBay, because I assume that, I mean, obviously I don't know what your life is like now day to day, but I
Mm,
assume that obviously you're still tapped in, you're still tuned in, and we'll talk about City Boy and Popeye in a second here.
mm,
What are some of the things that you're looking for personally? What are some of the items that you care about the most for your style? Are you kind of looking at everything? Are you looking at whatever catches your eye? Do you have particular pieces, particular styles that you're trying to fulfill, particular moments that you're trying to fulfill? Talk to me
yeah.
about that.
I I mean it's changed a lot over the years, as I think you could probably tell when you were snooping around my back catalog.
I have to
Uh,
snoop.
Um, I would say like the strongest thing I'm looking for when I shop is a very specific vibe. And I would say the vibe is like this is a weird thing to explain, but it's a clothing that is a little bit ambiguous about its origins.
Mm,
So I like something that you're kind of like, oh, that is not outlandish. Like I really like clothing that is like one step away from a normal piece of clothing. Does that make sense? So
yeah.
like you have a t-shirt, but it's just the cut is a little bit weird, or you have a
Mm,
tank top, but it's like it has some draping in an area that, is not a normal tank top. Or you have like I got just like random, and sometimes something just like strikes my eye and I'm like, yeah, that's a thing I want. I got
mm.
like a navy pullover, and sometimes something just tickles you and then you're like, oh, I gotta have it. It just like it had like weird patches on it. It was like not a brand I had ever heard of. It like the words on it I thought were silly, and then
Mm.
I like saved it in my watch list, and then like a month later I was like, okay, I'll buy it. And yeah, I would say like there's an ambiguousness to that, right? So like that it didn't have like a Nike logo on it per se. It was like had an interest to me, but it didn't have a specific origin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. It's almost like the way I'm thinking of it is like it kind of like there are archetypes for particular items, right?
Yeah,
When you think sneaker, when you think polo, when you think tweed jacket, when you think long coat, an
right,
item pops into your head,
right,
right? The most classic version of that item. And then there's all of these kind of like family trees that branch out from that item visually, and at least in my, they branch out. And all of these branches are either in line with that tradition or they subvert that tradition, but they still encapsulate a little bit of what that item looks or feels or
right,
is. And I think
right. They're
that's
referencing it.
they're referencing it. There's a reference to it. I think that's what you're talking about, right?
Right.
Has a little fun to it, right? It has something that is a bit intriguing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, I buy a bunch of basics as well, but I'm such a fit person. Um, as in like I'm focused so much on how things fit me, which is also what led to my sort of addiction to getting things tailored, is because when I'm not satisfied with something, I'm not satisfied with it. And I'm like, I either don't want it in my house anymore
Or it needs to be adjusted.
or it needs to be adjusted. And I
Yeah.
really, again, that's a time and interest thing. Most people don't have the time or interest to like be investing that sort of money or just like thought into their clothing. And that's like perfectly fine. But I just get very hyper fixated on if I feel totally comfortable in something. Because I'm like, if I put this on and every time I put it on, I'm like, ugh, it's a little wonky. I should, why keep it?
Yeah. Very good point. Something that I'm also the more and more that I progress in my style journey and my understanding of these things, that's also something that I've I've had things tailored. I've taken things to tailor, but I think ever since moving to New York City, I've been on the hunt for someone I can trust as well. So that
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna be making some sort of videos about that. But anyways, that's
Your
a
tailoring
conversation.
journey. That's
Yes,
exciting.
exactly,
I've
exactly.
been trying to learn how to sew so I can do some alterations myself.
That's
But
genius.
in terms of someone you can trust, I don't trust myself enough yet. So I've mostly been doing very small alterations. Like I think I hemmed this t-shirt I'm wearing.
Really?
Yeah, that looks like me. That zigzag stitch.
Oh, little swirl stitch that you
Yeah.
just made up.
I was like, oh yeah,
Jeez.
that's not
Jeez.
laying flat. So that was probably me.
Uh,
Um,
so Percia, I kind of want to do a couple things before we conclude.
yeah,
Um, I want to ask you about City Boy. I want to ask
yeah.
you about Popeye because I think, and I want to give you a bit of a story too, about
Mm.
more about not, it's not like crazy story. It's just a little bit of like a context about how I learned about you and basically why we're here.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
dying to
and,
know.
and then I want to end with a kind of like little concluding question, and then I'll let you enjoy New York City's beautiful day today. It's a bit warm, but it's
It's
sunny.
it's steamy.
Yeah, it's a bit warm, but it's sunny. Um, so context first. I was put onto your content, I think organically. I remember.
Okay.
I remember just swiping and you were doing a simple. um a simple video about how, you're referencing a particular style. My memory isn't like that toned in, like tuned into like the videos, because sometimes you watch a lot of videos in a
Mm,
period of time. But I just remember your video standing out, just your ability to speak, the way you spoke, your tonation. It wasn't a shout. It was just a conversation, right? And I think on social media right now, a lot of the content that does extraordinarily well from a numbers standpoint is typically a shout. It's a car crash. It's something that is trying so hard to get your attention. It sometimes can be very sensationalized. It can be something that's very crazy. And then obviously the flip side of that, there are videos like yours and people like yourself who are just real people, kind of how you spoke to earlier, right? Like you're a real person. You have friends who care about fashion, at some level, but aren't, crazy fashion MFs, aesthetics walking in New York City. And I always gravitated towards that. And then one of my buddies, and I talk about this dude a lot on the podcast. I actually just realized that Toon, he is a Dutch fellow who I befriended when I went to Amsterdam in 2022, when I was there, and we still talk, and he actually came to New York City, and we hung out while he was here. And he often sends me videos of different individuals, and he had come across one of your videos, and in one of your videos you said, you had actually referenced my style
I did.
for it. And I was like, wow, this is like I remember just seeing Percia's video before, and now like my friend is sending me a video of Percia referencing my style. I think that's so cool. And from then on I was like, okay, I can tell like there's a bit of mutual respect going on, immediate like intrigue for me, obviously. I mean, and that's a
Mm.
bit of my personal bias, but like intrigue for me. Um, and from then on in, like I've really been a huge fan of things that you've done, and in particular, this current mode that you're in, which is analyzing, talking about, looking at, and just being a part of the world that is the city boy aesthetic, right? This
Yeah.
the city pop, Popeye, and all the things that have to do with Japanese street culture in a particular manner. um, I don't want this question to be too big because now I've kind of built it up to something. But I guess initially I want to know how you got into this genre, this idea of fashion, which is like the city boy aesthetic, or being a city boy, this kind of this energy that Popeye has created and has created for a long time now. How did you get into that?
Yeah. The funny thing about this is the series I was doing right before the Popeye series, if you remember, was about Sarah Lynn Tran, who's like a
Cor-
creative director at La Mer.
Correct.
And her aesthetic versus what I've been calling the city boy style are like complete opposites, right? Very, very far on yeah, the fashion spectrum. And if you don't know Sarah Lynn, her stuff is very minimal. It's very elegant, like kind of drapey, beautiful lines, beautiful fabrics. Um, and it's it was really my winter persona, right? I really was attracted to that during the colder months. I thought her style translated really well to how I feel being in New York when it's cold and dreary.
Yep.
And I don't think I knew that. I don't think that I was cognizant until spring started turning and I was like, "Oh, I don't feel this way at all anymore." I was like, "I'm totally done with this." As much as I love her style and I love the clothes that I have that emulate hers, and I still wear them, obviously, I was just like, spiritually, spring has sprung and I don't want to wear all black anymore. I
Yep.
I am like a creature of the seasons. I will cop to that completely. And usually when spring turns, I do sort of lean more into like blues and greens. I'm not a hugely colorful person, but I'll do like a lot more what I would describe as like nautical themed clothing. Um, but how did I come around to City Boy? Now I'm trying to remember. I think what I said was that I was thinking a lot about what I was going to wear in hotter weather because candidly, I'm not that comfortable dressing for hotter weather. I don't like showing off a lot of skin. I hate shorts just like as an item of clothing. I'm sorry. I think they're like pretty ugly and pretty unflattering on me specifically. Obviously, when people are wearing shorts in the world, I'm not like, why are they doing that? Um, live your life, wear your shorts. I prefer to suffer. So I'm always thinking about what I can wear in the warmer weather. So the thing that immediately drew me back was my trip to Japan last September. And we kind of thought, oh, we're going to go to Japan. It was like mid to late September. It'll be beautiful, like close to fall, like the crispness in the air. It will enchant us. We got there, it was 90% humidity and 90 degrees every day.
Do you have a fan? You needed a fan with you at all times,
We,
something.
you know what they have? I didn't talk about this. The like people who work service jobs in Japan who have to wear uniforms, like let's say like a US, like a UPS guy, their uniforms are not very friendly to the hotter weather. They wear these vests that have fans in them. They wear
Stop.
cooling vests. We saw them everywhere. These people were like walking
That's
around,
crazy.
wearing their uniforms with these vests that would like cool them down. I was like, genius, I want one.
Dang.
Um,
Japan,
so
man.
yeah, they've always got a way. And I don't, we haven't talked about this, and I think you're a little bit on this spectrum too, but I I'm not a weeaboo. Uh, I
Oh my.
think, is it embarrassing? Yes. Do I love Japanese stuff? Also, yes. This is also a different discussion, but I'm not much of an outside nerd. I would call myself an inside nerd. So, like, I watch anime and I've read manga my whole life, and I don't like wearing that on my sleeve per
Mm,
se.
mm,
Um, but I love traveling. And I actually had been to Japan right before the pandemic with my family. And then my friends last year really wanted to go, and I was like, yeah, I'm down. So we went, and what the biggest thing I noticed is that Japanese people also don't wear a lot of shorts. Certainly there were shorts around, but I think especially people are going to work and you don't really wear shorts to work specifically.
yeah.
So a lot of the women were wearing big long skirts and blouses, and a lot of the men were wearing shirts and pants. I mean, I'm talking about office workers, so there's not a whole lot of like expression and diversity, obviously, but there's also creatives walking around, and I was just really struck by how they had dressed for the season. Um, and so when I was trying to figure out, because I think there's a little bit of a stutter for me every new season where I'm like, what am I dressing? What's 50-degree weather clothes? What's 60-degree weather clothes? What's 70-degree weather clothes? Like you kind of
Yeah.
forget every season. Our memories are so short.
Yeah.
And I was kind of just like, you know what? Let's just like make this easy. And I was like, try to remember what people were wearing in Japan when you went last summer, and let's see if we can do that. That should be cool. That should be comfortable. And so I made an initial video just calling it Japanese menswear because personally I don't really like wearing skirts. I don't own that many.
Yeah.
And I was more influenced by the silhouettes that I had seen men in Japan wear. And from that video, actually, you know what? I didn't know what I was talking about. When I made that video, I had no idea what I was talking about. I mean, I knew what I was talking about, but I didn't like know the cultural resonance behind it. I was just like, this is what I saw. I liked it. And then a bunch of people in my comments were like, "Oh, you're talking about this style. Like this is what you saw when you were in Japan." And they gave me the words for it. And
Mm,
again, this like goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning. That is what I am making content for. Tell me what I'm talking about. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me what your knowledge is. Tell me what excites you about what I'm doing. You know what I mean? Like that
totally.
sort of back and forth is like, that is the joie de vivre here. Like, that's what I want. So a couple people were like, I think what you're talking about is a mekaji or amatora or city boy. Like a couple people chimed in and they were like, this is the style you're referencing.
Hmm.
And then I was like, what is that? And again, as I said, like I'm learning about things publicly, essentially. That's a little bit of my issue, or maybe one of my main issues as a creator is I don't necessarily present myself as an expert because I don't believe in myself as an expert. All I'm doing is exploring publicly.
Totally.
And I try to do obviously as much research as I can as I'm exploring. So I'm presenting information that is correct, but I'm never being like, I've known about this for 10 years and you're just learning about it now. I was like, no, I learned about this yesterday and I'm excited to talk about it. And I don't really have anyone else to talk about it with.
Yeah,
But I want to talk about it with you guys.
totally.
And that was how I came to City Boy. And from there, when I just started Googling, I found that Reddit thread, which is, I've mentioned it day in and day out. I think the best Reddit thread in the world. Actually, the guy who wrote that Reddit thread found me and reached
Yeah, I
out to me.
saw. I,
That
I
was
think
amazing.
I think I saw that.
I
Like
think it was on Instagram.
I think I saw a comment that was like, "I'm so glad I started that." Something I remember seeing something. I
He
can't
was like, "Oh
remember.
yeah, I made that. I'm glad it's still circulating." I think
Correct.
that's
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
what he
Yeah.
said. And I was like, "You're my God." It was like the Messiah has come.
Yeah. Uh,
Um, and yeah, so just like learning about the individual brands that people consider to be hallmarks of that style, learning about the cultural references, learning about the historical references. And it's funny because some of the things people had told me about, I actually did know in like a general sense, but I didn't like put it all together.
yeah.
So a lot of people told me to listen to um articles of
Of interest.
interest.
Yep.
And again, I'm a podcaster. I'm like, yeah, I know what articles of interest is.
Yeah.
And I
Yep.
had listened to some of articles of interest, but I hadn't really, I don't think I was like paying attention with this framing in mind.
Yeah.
Um, and so I re-listened to it and I was like, oh, I understand what's happening now. It was like the, as my partner says, like the map, you know, when you're playing a video game and like the haze, the fog goes away
It
from the map.
lifts the
Yeah, and you're
shadows.
this right, you're like, oh, my map is filling in. Um, and yeah, so it was really, I can only say that it was my followers, honestly.
Very cool.
And I appreciate them so much for that.
Very, very cool. I love the fact that it is something that, well, there's a lot of things, right? I love the fact that you, and I have the same approach where it's like, you're, what we do is we're not experts. We're not in the necessarily, we're not in the, uh, how do I want to say? We're not professors of fashion,
Yeah,
right?
I'm not getting my PhD here.
Yeah, we're not professors of fashion. We have an interest, and that's the approach I've always taken. I have an interest in certain things, and you have an interest in certain things, and what you're doing is you're having a public conversation, right? You're
Yeah.
having this discourse around it. And it's cool because the audience, your peers in this discourse can course correct you
Hmm.
to make sure that you understand what's going on so that
Yeah.
you're more informed so that the next video you make or the next thing you talk about is more deeply informed.
Right.
And for me, like as a member of your audience, I love the fact that this is kind of the current mode you're in because for me, I've been obsessed with Ametura, Emekaji, Japanese Americana, Japanese
Yeah.
denim. It has been the right now I'm wearing a shirt by Beams, literally,
Oh,
that I've had
really?
for the last 2 years.
See, it's not new to you. It's true to you.
It's true to me. It's true to me. It's true to me. And
Well,
so it's really really fun and fascinating to see you and also it's fascinating to see it as on a different mold, right? Like
mm,
as someone who's people have now seen it from my content, I probably could do more, and I think you've inspired me to kind of reopen Pandora's box when it comes to
hmm.
Popeye and things like that because I have a
Yeah.
couple of issues, and I saw that you picked up some issues as well at
Yeah.
Kinokuniya.
Hmm.
How's that how you say it? How do you say that?
I think I say Kinokuniya.
Yeah, I say Kinokuniya too. um But like it's very fascinating and it's fun and I'm very excited for what comes
What
next for
comes next?
you and just how you're going through this and
I'm doing YouTube,
I'm a
baby.
fan. You're
I'm on
doing
your
YouTube.
heels.
Sheesh. I'm
YouTube is
it,
so hard.
yeah, it's not easy.
This is crazy. I can't believe people do this.
YouTube is very difficult because
YouTube is so hard.
the amount of times I don't know what element you're talking about it's hard because there's a lot of different things that
Yeah.
I've had to overcome from even the presentation aspect
Yeah.
like you make a mistake and you're like, "Fuck, why did I say it like that?" And you
Yeah.
kind of have to, and then like the
So much more
thumbnail
room for
elements.
effort. For
Yeah,
me, that's the packaging.
yeah,
That the packaging is so important really freaks me out. And I don't ha really have any like graphic design background. So I learned how to edit video freshly for YouTube. I learned how to like, make a thumbnail for YouTube.
right.
Titling is like a whole can of worms. I'll be upfront about something, my partner has a lot of YouTube experience.
Mm,
And so I have a little bit of a leg up, um, just being able to bounce questions off of him,
ideas. Yeah,
ideas and getting his input. Oh my God, there's a cardinal outside. Hello. Um,
I love it.
yeah, we live like right next to a big tree. The bird song woke me up at 5 a.m. this morning.
Jeez.
Um, anyway, so yeah, I'm trying to get into YouTube in a big way, especially because TikTok's demise feels so oncoming.
Imminent.
Imminent.
Yeah.
RIP, my first love. And I have to say, there's like a world in which TikTok was like never the platform for me. I
Mm,
don't think that like I necessarily am built for TikTok in the way that, well, I mean, your content makes sense in the fact that I think of TikTok as a very like organic and off the cuff platform in some ways, and I don't feel like that's who I am as a person.
yeah.
Um, and not that your content is very highly produced on TikTok, so you've like figured it out completely, and a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
Some of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm just like I'm wondering, like you said, like these building blocks, like the skills I built on TikTok, even though like I have like 50,000 followers, which is like literally the cutoff for even being an influencer. I am like literally the bottom of the rung there. Um, it yeah, I think like those skills helped me build an Instagram following, which is now bigger than my TikTok following, and maybe those skills will help me build a YouTube. It's just like
Yeah.
you learn so much along the way.
Totally.
And I think actually the just the aspect of YouTube that it's like inherently not off the cuff, it's like inherently has to be like so well considered and produced. Um, it's just yeah, it's a new way to think about it for sure. But
Why did you start making YouTube videos?
um why did I start making YouTube videos? I mean, my partner, again, being such a YouTube person, had been telling me for a while, you should try YouTube.
Mm,
It's stable and like also candidly more easily monetizable. Um,
yep.
and I was doing I what happened was I started doing this is really weird. I we were watching a TV show, Newsroom. It's like an
Mm,
Aaron Sorkin TV show.
yeah.
And as a sort of like spoof, I didn't say this, but sort of as a spoof, I started filming myself at my desk because I was like inspired by Newsroom.
That's where it comes from. I should ask
You,
that.
you were like, why are you filming at your desk? Because a lot of people on YouTube film their face, right? Like they
Yeah.
film closer shots. And I was like, wouldn't it be funny if I just filmed my whole ass desk? And my desk is it's kind of shitty. It's actually my desk is a vanity. Um, and it
That's
has
so
like a
good.
mirror and like a thing that flips up, and I just have it closed all the time. And so it's tiny, and I just move it all the way back so that you can like see the whole tiny desk.
I love it. I
It's
love
and
it.
yeah. So I think when I started making content like that, people were like, "What are you doing? Like, go on YouTube. Why are you making 2 minute, 3 minute long videos sitting at a desk with a microphone? You're on the wrong platform."
And so that's what you did. You went on YouTube.
And so I was like, "Okay, fine. God." People were also telling me to start a podcast, and I was like, over my dead body.
I think you
Not
have a
gonna.
very like I could see the podcast comments because I think your voice is very,
Oh yeah.
I don't know what it is. Like certain people have voices that you could just listen to. And I think that
I appreciate that.
yours is like this energetic but calm, excited but particular
Hmm.
voice. And
It's my low tenor. It's my low resonance.
exactly. See, I don't know what that means, but I'm saying yes. What does that mean? Tenor?
Um, yeah, it's just that I have kind of a low voice.
Oh,
At least that's my theory. People have a predilection for not liking high female voices on audio,
I see. Yes,
which
I
is
see.
really a shame, but I have a little bit of a lower register.
Yeah, that might be it
But I
actually,
have been
because
thinking a lot more about vocal fry too, because uh yeah, it's another thing people really don't like listening to for women is vocal fry.
vocal fry. What is that?
You know the way the Kardashians talk, where it's like,
Yes.
it's hard to do, but I do it sometimes. It's like, well, I was telling him like,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not the high, it's the vibration. It's the vibration in the back of the neck.
Mm.
I'll try to do it later, but
So people
men
don't
do it
like
too.
that.
It's just that people notice it more. Yeah, people like if you're on the radio, again, this is like part of my background. If you're on the radio and you have vocal fry, male listeners will write in and be like, God, why does she have so much vocal fry? Like, can't you get someone who's like a professional? And it's extremely gendered content comment. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's just my
What
soapbox.
when it comes to no, it's interesting. When it comes to like, sorry, I'm kind of going off the cuff right now. Do you have
No,
time?
it's okay. Yeah, yeah, I have time. I do you have time is the question.
No, but
Okay.
I'm having fun, honestly. So
I'll
let's just go.
we can end whenever you want.
Yeah, that's perfect. I just want to ask a couple more questions about
Yeah.
your world, radio fry, tonation,
Yeah.
voices. Um, when you work with different individuals in different environments, with audio, with all these things, what is the how do I want to ask a question? Because I feel like for me, like there's some value for the audience and there's some value for myself to learn how to better understand. So when I process my audio, I do process the audio. If I'm
Mm.
sorry, I misspoke. Um, but I have like a what is it called? Hold on. It's called a filter curve EQ. I EQ
Hmm.
the audio, right? Is that
Yeah.
like when I do that, I have these certain points that I hit when I'm filtering the EQ. Is there an optimal like
It depends
range
on the voice.
on the voice? And like what is
Yeah.
that? What talk to me about that? Like what goes into that? Maybe I can just discover it for myself if I'm just curious.
Yeah. I'm not I don't do so much like mixing and mastering, which is essentially what you're talking about, but
Mm,
the EQ, I have EQ'd voices and it's usually because either their voice is like so low that you have to like kind of cut off the lower, like you essentially move them into a higher frequency.
mm,
Or it's so high you want to move them into low, or like they're recording in a weird place or they have a weird microphone. Things can be tinny, is something that we talk about sometimes. And you want to make things warmer, like you want people's voices to sound full and round. And that's how you would EQ something to get things to sound a little like thicker almost, as
right.
opposed to a thinner voice. But that also has to do with like their microphone or the room they're recording in. Um, but that's usually when I EQ. The processing I do usually has to do more with plugins like like taking out plosives, which is the popping sound you get with a P,
Got it.
or removing background sound.
Mm,
So
correct.
I think it's kind of expensive, but I use this tool called like RX. I think they're on like 7 or 8 now. I think I had RX 6, and you can have all sorts of tools about doctoring your audio essentially
Very interesting.
if people sound kind of shitty.
No, yeah, that makes sense. I also do something like that on Audacity. It's called noise reduction,
Yes,
where
exactly.
I find it or a lot of times what I try to do before I record a YouTube video, podcast, whatever it is, I let the
You get room
track
tone.
correct. I get room tune. And then I take whatever that is and then just cut it out of every piece of audio
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm doing that right. Okay, cool.
You're all over it. We could do a separate call about this if you want. I'm happy to talk you through it.
No, that's good. I want to ask you one more question. When it comes to, and this is maybe this isn't much value for the audience. God damn it. Let me know what. Let me just ask you the question that I had in mind for you know what? No, this isn't value to someone. Me. Um when it comes to audio gear, and if you're listening, you know, maybe there's someone who like wants to start creating content and we can talk to them too, or there's someone who, you know, cares about maybe having their voice displayed even for like business calls if like your Zoom calls you just want to enhance the audio whatever for you like is there a reason behind the microphone the setup that you have like why do you use the equipment you have is equipment that important or is it less important how do you kind of decipher the this old adage of like you got to have good stuff to get good product.
I think this is actually a discussion. I'm not going to say argument that me and my partner have because he has a podcast and it's been running for over 5 years, I think. And the microphone I'm using is not the microphone he normally uses, but it's a microphone he bought for when him and his co-host are together in person. And it's essentially like a handheld mic that they can use if they want to like sit on the couch or do something. They've done videos or they've done episodes sitting outside. Um, and they got these mics for that. This mic is a USB mic. I don't know exactly how much it costs. I don't think it probably costs more than $150.
Yeah,
I don't think you need a better like you don't need a better mic than this. If you are an independent creator, you really don't. Microphones have gotten so much better and so much cheaper. I would say I have a little bit of um a stigma against lavs, which are the smaller microphones that you attach to yourself. Again, those are great for content creation. Like obviously when you're recording a TikTok, you have to stand far away from the camera. You want to get good audio, you use a lav. But if you're sitting down and recording YouTube or a podcast, you definitely want to get a real quote unquote microphone. Um,
definitely.
but listen, the camera I have, which I bought for YouTube, I did not really have a camera before I decided to do YouTube. I got the very classic Sony ZV-1,
Yep.
um, because it's like the cheapest thing you can get that looks okay.
Yeah,
Um, and I also don't think, candidly, that people should be spending a lot of money on something that they don't know they're gonna do. Like you don't know how long, I don't know how long I'm gonna make YouTube videos, but maybe I'll fall in love with it and I'll be making them for 10 years. If I start, really feeling like I'm investing in YouTube, then I will go out and buy a nice camera.
totally.
But to start out, I mean, start small. And I know people who record their podcasts on their iPhones.
Yep.
And you can get good sound from shitty microphones,
It's true.
including an iPhone mic.
Very
Um,
true.
if you sit in your closet and you have your mic the proper distance, if you sit in a closet and you have your phone the proper distance away from your mouth, you can get really quality audio that is good enough for a person to want to listen to.
Yep.
And the other secret is most people are not focusing on it nearly as much as you are. So I have people who give edit notes on episodes, and I'm like, no one is listening to this the way you are listening to this. You do not need to worry about that extra like. You do not need to worry about that extra I'm listening to podcasts that way, but that's because I'm an audio professional. But most people who listen to podcasts don't give a crap. It like there's certainly a base. There's a base quality, but anything above that is really fairly unnecessary.
Yeah.
That's my take.
I love it. And honestly, all the things you said, I started this podcast from the beginning. I
You've
was
been
reco-
doing this podcast for a long time. I didn't
yeah.
realize that this podcast was around like almost from the start.
Yeah, it's kind of in the shadows compared to my other forms of content because everything else is more algorithmic and I don't
Yeah.
really I don't really push this as much because I kind of just want it to be something that if you care,
Yeah.
like you'll find
It's
it.
here for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Um,
interested in that because it's yeah, I think people usually make podcasts as the last thing. That's like the last thing they decide to make is like on top of everything they build, they make a podcast. But it was one of your like starting
it was the
platforms.
first. It was
It was the
literally
first?
the first type of content I ever started making. As Drew Joyner.
That's
Now,
fascinating.
for my business, it was I was making like I was obviously doing like lookbook imagery and things like that. But like, yeah, the podcast was the very first, and I knew it was the first. I knew I wanted it to be the first because I knew I wanted to. The idea was I wanted to learn. I wanted to
Yeah,
really try to truly learn, and in the environment which was during the pandemic in 2020, like I thought it would
right.
be such a great opportunity. Everyone's at home. Like I could, and I did. You could talk to different uh like chief executives of Calvin Klein and Nike and New Balance and all these different people were just having conversations with me just to talk, and I built relationships just off of that. And they had no idea that I'm 13 episodes in, we get like 60 people who listen to this, but like I was saying and doing things like it was like I was a professional podcaster. Obviously, I'm way better now. I try to be way better now, but in the beginning, I did all the things. I was recording on my phone. The camera I bought was a super cheap Canon camera. In fact, I was even doing the thing that you said that you wouldn't want me to do. I was recording using like a $20 lav mic from Amazon, like
Yeah.
in my hand, just talking
Yeah.
to it. I mean,
Listen, if it works,
it works.
if it works, I can't argue at
Yeah,
all. Like, obviously use what you have first. Always
for
use what
sure.
you have
For
first.
sure. For sure. No, I wasn't pushing back on what you were saying. I was just saying, I mean, that's just what I did.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right, well, let's 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 ask this final question and then
Hmm.
let's get on with our New York City days. I don't know if you have a busy day in front of you. It's Monday.
It's Monday.
So I don't know how
I'm
you feel
trying to
about
get a
Mondays.
I'm trying to get another City Boy video out today. That's my plan.
City Boy fit check.
It's a YouTube video.
Oh,
Yeah. I'm doing City Boy starter pack.
I love it. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
I'm tuned in. I can't wait to see.
Okay.
So the last question I want to ask you, Percia, it's been a great episode. Probably the longest episode that I've had up until this point. We could probably go way longer. It's just a time thing. But you've been awesome, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I always want people who are listening and you to know that because it's, all these guests that I bring on, they take time out of their lives to try to bring myself value and you value, and I think it's important, right? So, Percy, I want to ask you last question here. If slash when I just dropped an eraser. If slash when you decide to re-listen to this episode a year from now, kind
Mm.
of as a year in review, in what way would you have hoped to grow, whether it be in your professional life, whether it be content, whether it be your style? In what ways would you like to have grown in that time span? Basically, what do you see yourself doing in 2025 on April 29th at 12:42 p.m.?
Um, I think what I'm really focused right now, what I'm really focused on right now, I think is probably YouTube for a number of reasons. For me, in both my jobs and my hobbies, what I love the most is learning new skills. And once I just get like into routines with certain um creative projects, I think it loses a little bit of luster for me.
Mm,
And so it's a little bit of a gift and a curse, I think, but I am always sort of like jumping to the next thing. I'm always trying a different format. I'm always trying a different structure. And that's just because that's sort of the excitement for me is to challenge myself, as frustrating as it might be. But you also discover so many new things. You discover new audiences, new interests, new skills, things that are not in your wheelhouse. Um, and so yeah, that's, I guess, my hope is that I remain consistent to the degree that I've been trying to be, but also that I have like discovered a whole different thing to try a year from now. That could be like, I don't know, like personal styling work. That could be like working with companies. That could be going all in on YouTube. That could be a number of things, but I think I'm chasing newness chronically, and I foresee that in my future.
I love it. We didn't even talk about your personal styling options and capabilities because I saw that as well in a part of your link tree. I didn't even look as deeply into it, but
Yeah, I
we
just
should have
keep
done
on
it for
getting
that.
questions about it.
Mm,
So I've been just helping some friends with
cool.
it a little bit.
Percia Verlin, ladies and gentlemen. Do you want to give any acknowledgement to your social pages or even your partners? Because I'm actually kind of curious about that too.
Oh yeah, I can send you all his stuff. So all my
Uh,
stuff is under the handle Percish, Percish. I have always struggled with usernames, so honestly, I don't remember how I came up with that, but it was good enough, and then I just stuck with it. It's usually not claimed by other people.
that's what it usually comes down to.
Is a helpful part of it. And yeah, I would say definitely go on to YouTube. That's the thing that I'm really working on right now. And so I'm also looking for like the most feedback there right now. I want to hear what people are interested in, what they're looking for, what kind of content they like. And That's it. Thank you so much, Drew. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for allowing me this amount of time.
No, of course, it's great. Like I said, I'm a fan. I wouldn't have you on unless I thought that there was something special, obviously. And I just I'm just as happy to have you on. Honestly, I'm thanking you because like it's cool to be able to talk to different folks and being in the city. We're both in the city,
Yeah.
both in New York City, I should say. And maybe our paths cross in some way
Yeah.
in a physical manner that we can hang out, something like that.
Of course. You've become a New Yorker so quickly. Are
Oh,
you
you
in the
think so?
city?
Uh, when you say that, what do you like? What are you
I mean
saying?
Manhattan.
See that those are some things that
You're not telling the public.
not the public.
Okay.
Yeah, not right now at least. Um, but yeah, it's been fun being in New York, and we should definitely hang out at some point for sure.
Sounds good. Thank you,
Um,
Drew.
cool.